Welcome to Picks with the Professor, the show where an actual statistics professor and his friends give you sports betting tips. I'm your host, Professor Sides. For the latest updates and information, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook. And for extra free picks, you can find us on TikTok. All those links are in the description. This college basketball episode covers select games scheduled to be played on Tuesday, November 29th, 2022. In case you're new here, check out the webpage on the banner. It's www.pickswiththeprofessor.com/new for a primer and explanation. Otherwise, the goals for this episode are to share key information about these games, give you a few things to think on, and explain why certain plays are being made. We never recommend blindly tailing or fading any pick, but rather to hear the justifications and thought processes to make sure you're fully on board with us or against us before investing your hard-earned money. Remember that Sideline has graded plays on every single game, but as always, take what you like and leave the rest. And if you have questions about these or other games, the best place to get those answered is on the Discord chat, which can be accessed through Patreon, link in the show description. As always, remember there are no locks in gambling, so what Sideline provides are loves, likes, and leans. That is A, B, and C grades to indicate its confidence level with respect to scaling wagers. Again, we're only covering a subset of the games today in this episode. So for the full slate of picks, check out the link in the show description or on the website homepage. They're all in that Google sheet, like always. Lastly, please understand that good and bad variance will occur. So as much as we'd like to see will be profitable each and every day, that is an impossible reality for any gambler. Cousin Jared. Pretty successful debut for you on the first episode. We were talking a little bit before show. If you don't count parlays, because those are people have very mixed feelings about those. You went 3-2 on the straight up picks. So I mean, 3-2 on the straight up picks. If we can do that every time out, that's a good one, right?
That is the dream for sure. I'll keep giving out some of the parlays at least today because I think there's some good stuff out there. But yeah, let's be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of parlays. So sometimes just want to give the best information that I can for the people though.
And it's something I've thought about. On the parlays, part of what we kind of were talking about too was if we like a side in the total, it's just kind of a good way to talk about it. And so I want to make sure the viewer understands, like, we will try to talk about when they're correlated, and that makes the parlay a little bit more valuable. But a lot of times it may also just be, hey, hear what we're saying about them, and you pick the one you like the most and play that. You don't necessarily have to put them together. It's just a way to talk about we like a side and we like a total, right? It's not
right
necessarily – if that's not your thing, don't just be like, ignore that. Be like, hey, see which one you like and play one or the other, right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we get to today's slate, some reminders. Please hit that like button if you're on YouTube. Also, if you aren't yet, please consider subscribing or following. It's free. And if you turn on notifications, you won't miss any of the college basketball, MLB, or college football content that this channel provides. I've already mentioned the Patreon, but check it out if you haven't yet. Lots of great benefits to be found there above and beyond what we do here. Membership starts at just $3 per month. www.patreon.com/pickswiththeprofessor. But even if you're not there, we're still thrilled to have you here. Let's get to it all on courtesy of BetOnline. Sign up link in the show description and current at the time of this recording on Monday night. Cousin Jared, of all the A plays, I think there were 8 or so of them that were locked in, again, made available for our patrons at the starter level. They've already seen those picks even as we're recording. I think there were 8 of them. Your favorite, the A-plus play of the day in your book, 6 p.m. Central, VMI and Presbyterian. And look, we faded Presbyterian a lot this season. It's mostly worked out for us. So I feel like this might just be as simple as stay on the train, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what this is. And, as we've mentioned a lot during the college football show, especially last season, not one that you have to watch to make the monies, because this is not a game that you will want to watch, I promise. But again, I'm here to give information where I think there's value. And I think this game has a little bit of value here. So look, neither of these teams, very good. Presbyterian currently on a 6-game losing streak. VMI, not much better. But I think you're getting 4.5 points in a game where Presbyterian's offense has had issues all season. They have yet to be able to get out the low to mid 60s. They're just not a team that's going to score a lot of points. VMI, again, not very impressive, but the teams that they've had the most trouble with are ones that can put up lots of points on the board. So you look at some of the teams that they played. Fairleigh Dickinson, let me tell you, if you haven't caught any Fairleigh Dickinson games this year, you should, because they play a little bit reckless. SIU Edwardsville was going through this weird phase where they decided they were going to score like 90 points for like 4 games in a row. They caught them in that time. VMI played Davidson. So they've played a lot of teams that can score some points. And again, Presbyterian is not one of the teams that's going to be able to score a lot of points. So I think getting 4.5 points in a game where Sideline says this game's about 50-50, and I just don't see this game getting very far out of control either way, just because I don't think either team's going to put up a bunch of points. I think 4.5 points is just too much to pass up in this spot.
Yeah, you bring up Fairleigh Dickinson, according to Ken Palm, the worst defense in the country out of all 363 teams. So yeah, they
about what I would have guessed.
Yeah, exactly. And the offensive defensive metrics that he's got kind of align with that same thought process, which is what we're talking about, that VMI's defense is bad. And so when you have a team that can score, they just can't hang with anybody because they just give too many points. Their offense is decent. Like I said, Presbyterian, not one of those teams. So grind it out, one of those where each team's going to have a 4-point lead and the ball. And it's one of those like, hey, they could get out to a 10-point lead and they're going to go like 3 minutes without scoring. And the other team's going to 4-point, just kind of that type of game. So again, Sidelines has basically a dead heat. VMI is actually a little bit better on the road, not giving Presbyterian a large home court advantage. I can't see the crowd being frantic and wild there because why would that happen? So grabbing 4.5 points of VMI is your A+ play of the day. To the best B side here, again, about I think 7 B picks locked in already. Again, more coming in the morning, but for now we've got 7 of them. 8 p.m. Central, Wake Forest and Wisconsin, a game that is actually one that you might want to watch. A little bit of intrigue. This one, better programs, better teams. Sideline says this should be Wisconsin minus 5.3, but we're grabbing Wake Forest plus 6.5 as a B grade. Because Jared, of all the B grade picks, why is this the best one in your mind?
Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it here. Does Wisconsin play a type of game where they're going to be able to cover 6.5 points against a team like Wake Forest? This seems to me that it's going to be a one-possession game late, just because that seems to be the type of game that Wisconsin wants to play. And so if Wisconsin is ahead, maybe you end up in a situation with free throws there where they seem to lead a little bit and maybe get close to this number. But I just think this is too many points in a game that I think is going to be a one-score game. Wisconsin just went through that tournament where every game they played kind of came down to the last minute. Again, I just don't think they play a style that they can really get out ahead of people. But you even go look back, and I remember this, November 15th, Wisconsin-Green Bay came and played at Wisconsin in Madison. And we had Wisconsin-Green Bay in that game, and there was never a question that we were going to cover. We got like 19 points or 20 points or something like that. Wisconsin only won that game by 11. The Stanford team that is not great this season, lost by 10 at Wisconsin. I think Wake Forest is quite a bit better than Stanford is. So to me, this just seems like too many points for a Wisconsin team that has trouble scoring points and a Wake Forest team so far this season that has been pretty solid offensively.
Yeah, and I think what I hear you say there kind of just makes me think about, we often talk about, it just because you know a sport well doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to bet the sport well. That part of betting is knowing all sorts of other things beyond the X's and O's. And so kind of what you are identifying here is sometimes what we talk about, that the type of game this team plays is going to make it hard to, they might be 6.5 points better, but that doesn't mean they play a type of game that lends themselves to winning by that many because of just the style of basketball. And so, I think it's a pretty good observation. So we're grabbing the 6.5 with Wake Forest in that one. On to the professor on a limb. For the first time all season, I am going to take a C grade pick here and talk about why I like it. And my analysis on this one is short and simple, has nothing to do with the fact that I went to Baylor, but I'm laying the 6 with Baylor. It's a C grade pick according to the model. This one to me is about, I was telling Cousin Joe before show, and I had to look up the numbers. I was thinking to myself, watching Baylor play Texas almost every year that Shaka Smart was in Austin, I was thinking to myself, I was like, I think those Baylor teams just destroy Texas most of those years. And I think Baylor's record in those in that time, they played a couple times in the conference tournament. One year they only got to play once because of COVID, but I think it was like 11-2 straight up. And a lot of those teams, Texas had decent teams, and I just think Baylor, Scott Drew knows, Shaka Smart knows what he's going to try to do. And Marquette's playing a little bit of a different style there than he did at Texas, but it's still close enough to the same sort of thing. I'm going to trust that Baylor's going to get the job done to win by 6. So I'm going out on a limb, and I'm going to say that Baylor minus 6 is actually a pretty good play, even though the model doesn't like it. So because I think Scott Drew's familiarity with Shaka Smart and his style gives him an edge, whereas you would say, well, what about the other way around? The other way around, I think, for the most part, what we see with Scott Drew is a tendency to do something different based off his players, which was the knock against him for the first maybe 10 years of his career, was he just plays the same zone, he plays the same thing, and he kind of did. And then all of a sudden that started changing, and that's when the program got to new heights. Was they'll play zone one year, then they'll play man, then they'll play zone, and that sort of thing. They'll have different styles of offense. So I don't think Shaka's familiarity with Drew's going to do a whole lot, but I think Drew's familiarity with Shaka will. So I'm going to go ahead and lay the 6 with Baylor. Back to you, Cousin Jared. We talked about the parlay here, when you like a side and total on. So we're going to shake and bake without Jake tonight. 8 p.m. Central, Alcorn State and Grand Canyon. My personal take, I feel like I've backed Grand Canyon a couple times and it's not gone well, and I faded them a couple times and it has. So I don't know. Just my thought is we should be fading Grand Canyon in general. And also, I think the model's 4-1 backing Alcorn State, a team that doesn't get a lot of love. Not a great team, but when you talk about the point spreads, you don't have to win the game to be a good team to bet on with the point spread. So we're getting 13 points here with Alcorn State. That's an A grade according to the model. Cousin Jared, you like Alcorn State plus 13. You also like playing the under 123.5. Tell us why this is a good parlay.
Well, the first thing is that Sideline projects this total to be about 126.5, which is the lowest total on the board for tomorrow or today as you're watching this. And the thing is that when the Sideline sets a total that low, there is usually a reason that it is set that low. And you will usually see that the books hang a number that's actually a couple points even lower than that, just because, as we've talked about many times on the football show and on this show and on the baseball show, just have a real difficult time with outliers sometimes. And so I think Grand Canyon defensively is an outlier up there with like Fresno State, North Texas, Air Force. Pro tip there: next time you see an Air Force total, just blindly bet the under. I think that Grand Canyon kind of falls into that category. So that was the first thing that caught my eye.
They also play at a snail's pace. It's partially the defense. It's partially they just are not in a hurry to play basketball.
Even better. And so you go look at Alcorn State. They play two teams that could be considered kind of similar to this. They play Wichita State, who's also playing very slow this year. That game only got to 123. They played Cal State Bakersfield, which I talked about last time I was on the show. Alcorn State and Cal State Bakersfield only got to 116 points in that game. So both of these Grand Canyon likes to play low-scoring games. Alcorn State is susceptible to, when they play a team with a good defense, play slow, they can also get low-scoring. I don't know what to tell you about Grand Canyon. They have played some multiple stinker games. Maybe the best example, they scored 81 in a game and the total only got to 129. So, I mean, they win low-scoring games. Even when they score, there's a great opportunity that the other team doesn't score any at all. So, anyway, where I'm going with all this is Grand Canyon, good defense. Alcorn State, susceptible to playing the style of game that their opponent wants to play. I like under 123.5, and you're telling me that I can also get 13 points in a game that I think is going to be low scoring, and Sideline says that that's 13 points is A grade. Almost seems too good to be true to me. So I like getting the 13 points with Alcorn State, and I also like the under 123.5.
All right. Yep. Sideline says that should be 11.4 for the spread. So getting some good value there with Alcorn State and all those points. Speaking of totals, getting high with the cousin here, 6 p.m. Central, South Carolina State at East Carolina. The total on this one is 147. Why is this a good over bet in your mind?
Well, the first thing is, I don't. Apparently, Fairleigh Dickinson is the worst defense in college basketball. I would be interested to know where South Carolina State is on that list, because I think that South Carolina State's defense is absolutely an abomination. They have given up 90, 105, 72, 106, 96, 80, and gave up 80 to South Carolina, which seems impossible with how South Carolina has looked this season. East Carolina, on the other hand, they are a solid offense. They got in a game with UT Arlington. UT Arlington, another one of those teams that is just absolutely running a snail's pace, like to go under. They got that game to 135. Toledo got to 160. Indiana State got to 155. So East Carolina has played in some high scoring games. I think when you combine East Carolina's offense with South Carolina State's defense, I think this is going to be fireworks in this game. I think this one gets closer to 150. And so I think the over 147 is a good play here. I think East Carolina is going to get about 90 points in this game.
Yeah, South Carolina State's defense ranks 347 according to Ken Palm, but I think the thing that caught my eye is that their tempo is 36. So I think it's
Mm-hmm.
extremely bad, not worst in basketball, but extremely bad defense combined with a very fast pace is a recipe to give up a lot of points, which is exactly what you're saying. Like East Carolina is going to flirt with the century mark in this one. I don't know if they're going to get there, but you have to assume they're going to get close if they can't get there because of the way they play. It reminds me a little bit of, we talked about Northwestern in football kind of being the same situation. And
yes.
I don't know who's coaching South Carolina State. I'm not trying to do his job. I'm sure he has reasons for what he's doing, but you just have to look at it. You have to wonder if he decides, especially getting into conference play, that the defense is so bad and they have, or maybe Arizona's a good example in football, right? When Arizona started playing a little bit more cautious, a little bit slower later on in the season, that got them that upset win against UCLA by limiting the possessions. You know, if South Carolina State does that in basketball at some point, just keep an eye on it. If it flips the number of possessions, those totals are going to come way down. But at this pace, their defense is so bad, they're going to give up so many points that it's you know, like you said, it's almost just like a blind over until the number gets extremely, you know, way out of hand or something like that.
Yep, exactly.
All righty, to another total, the How Low Can You Go segment, 8 p.m. Central. Cal State Northridge at Boise State. The model has a B grade pick for the record on Cal State Northridge at plus 19.5, since it should only be in the low 17s. Because, Jared, you like the under 130.5. Tell us why that is a good under investment here for Tuesday night.
I could not believe that this total was in the 130s. Sideline made this 128.5. And I think that Boise State is just similar to how they were last year. They are just a good defensive team. When they played Colorado, they only gave up 55. Loyola Chicago, they only gave up 48. Charlotte, they only gave up 54 points. Somehow they only managed to score 42. Though, so that would be a problem for them. I think Boise State's defense is just solid, and Cal State Northridge has had some games this season where they have played more up-tempo teams, but they haven't necessarily had the point output that you would expect when they were playing a team with a higher tempo. Specifically, I'm looking at like a Central Michigan game where they scored 66 points. Central Michigan likes to get up and down the court, and Cal State Northridge only scored 66 points in that game. I think the best analog that you have for this game is probably when Cal State Northridge played California Baptist, and that game only had 117 points. And I think Boise State's defense is better than California Baptist defense is. So I think you're getting a steal with this game in the 130s. I would probably play this down to like 127, maybe 126, just because I feel really confident about Boise State's defense. But under 130.5, I think is a great play here.
How many points do you think Cal Baptist and Northridge game had?
Cal Baptist and Cal State Northridge had 117.
Okay. I think that's a really good parallel. I think that Boise State's defense is better, but I think Cal Baptist plays at a slower tempo, which probably balances that about out. So, yeah, I think that's a great parallel. That 117 probably a pretty reasonable spot for this one to lay into. Boise State is a team that we played a lot of their unders last year because almost exactly what you talked about, which is they have a really good, like, elite defense, like one of the best defenses for a the group of whatever we're calling them, a mid-major, whatever you call those, right? Non-Power 5, right? One of the best defenses outside the Power 5 schools. And they don't play extremely slow. They don't really play fast. They play a little bit slow. But when they play a team that goes slow, they're like, all right, let's grind this game out. They're very happy doing that. I remember a lot of those Mountain West games against the San Diego States, against the Wyomings, against some of those other teams that would grind it out. Yeah. Fresno State or Air Force, some of these other teams. Yeah, I remember last year we'd end up and there'd be those like 55 to 42 type game. That was normal for them because they weren't quite driving the pace down, but they would play those other teams and be like, sure, we'll play at that really low pace. I remember playing some under like 115s and it like not even getting close to the number. And it seems like Boise State's doing the same thing this year. Northridge, a team that aligns with that same sort of style. So a good underplay there. We've locked in under 130.5. To the must-see TV segment, you could argue that the Baylor Marquette game would be the biggest must-see game of the night. But another one to talk about here is 8:30 Central, Virginia at Michigan. I don't really, because Jared and I talked a lot about the side on this one. I think we were both kind of leaning towards Virginia. It feels a little square, and I don't like I don't buy into that being a negative thing, right? Even if you talk about public sides or whatever, like the public still wins 49, 50, whatever percent of the time, 51 maybe even. It's like the problem is the public in general doesn't win at the 52.4% clip or higher, right? But they still win a lot, right? So I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It does feel a little bit like too obvious though. And I'm wondering, like, Michigan's been a letdown, but I don't know. I don't think I'd want Michigan in a few number of points either. So I was just feeling very wiffle-waffly on that. I think, like I said, we were both maybe leaning Virginia, but very afraid to do that. But the thing I like in this is the total's at 131 and almost copy paste what we said on the previous segment. I think 131 is too high. The model says it should be 129. And again, we talked about the sideline doesn't like to go to those extreme low totals. There's this little narrative that Virginia's scoring a lot of points. Like that Baylor game, Baylor has scoring this year for sure and isn't quite as good defensively yet. I think that's what they're trying to work towards. And also that game got weird. Virginia hit like 14 threes in a row or something ridiculous like that. I don't remember how it exactly played out, but it felt like they just could not miss for that stretch early in the second half of that game. It was incredible to watch. Yeah. I don't think that's what's going to happen. This crowd's going to be pretty rowdy there for Michigan. They're still going to be high off of the win Saturday. I don't mean that from a drug standpoint. I mean, they're going to be pumped. I feel like it's going to be a rocking place. That crowd's going to get into it. I think that's going to slow down the tempo. Michigan's not a team that plays fast, and Virginia, I think, playing a bigger team, I don't think they're going to try to get into a run and gun type game here. I think they needed to do that against Baylor because Baylor was scoring and Baylor's got the offense. I don't think that Michigan sets it the exact same way. So I'm going under 131 there in what we're calling the must-see TV game, one to watch. Of course, Baylor, we've already talked about the other one, but this Virginia-Michigan game, I think we should be rooting for defense. I think 131 is too much. Which takes us to the overtime slot. A game because you and I both talked about. I feel like we should both take credit for this one. Maybe like I've got our separate tabs in the sheet tracking our records. Like if this wins, we'll each take a half win, and if this loses, we'll each take a half loss. Because I feel like we both.
Or let's just each take a full win and a full loss. That's fine.
All right. We'll have to figure something out on this. And actually, I'm just making stuff up as we go right here. We have not talked about this at all. But we both really like this one. 7 p.m. Central, Montana at Southern Miss. And it's one I think personally to get in sooner rather than later. Hopefully you're with us on – if you're with us on Patreon and you're up here tonight, you're watching this, you're getting it really early in the morning, and this number is still around this 6.5 number. I'm afraid it's just going to go up. This Southern Miss team is really good. Silence says it should be 8.4. And like I said, I think that's the direction it heads. Montana has looked pretty bad this year, and Southern Miss has looked amazing. We talked about teams outperforming the model. It's only 4 non-Division 2 games, 4 Division 1 games, but in those 4 games, they've overperformed the model expectations by 20 points per game. And we talked about this yesterday with Sam Houston State being the same way. That's going to come down, but it just goes to show, kind of like we talked a lot about with football all season, has the model caught up yet? And the answer to Southern Miss is, I'm not sure if the model's caught up, but if it hasn't, then instead of the model saying it should be Southern Miss minus 8.4, maybe it should be 9.4 or 10.4 or who knows what number. Yeah. But there's a chance that the model still doesn't realize how good Southern Miss is because they've just been so much better than the expectations. And if they continue to outperform the expectations and outperform the 8.4, that means we've got a pretty easy winner here. So I think we both like laying this 6.5 in the spot.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is, Missoula, Montana, beautiful place. Making the trip down to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, a place. I think that it's going to be. I mean, I feel like we don't talk about travel enough when it comes to college basketball. This team,
especially these non-conference games.
Yeah, they were playing Sunday in Colorado Springs, which, that part of the country, geography, things look closer than they really are. That's not necessarily a short jaunt from Missoula, Montana to Colorado Springs, and then going down to Hattiesburg, Mississippi. I think this is a tough travel spot for Montana. So I like Southern Miss to begin with, but the more I look at it, I just think you got every reason in the world to back Southern Miss in this game. I can't find a good one to try to back Montana.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And just to hammer home that point with travel, we talk about that with college football. Most of the college football that we discuss being just the FBS schools is, for the most part, either close travel or it's major city to major city travel, and there's not any weird logistics of that travel. But we talk about sometimes a place like Manhattan, Kansas, being a tough place to play at, obviously the crowd, but also to travel to, because it's like out in the middle of nowhere, right? Or we talk about West Virginia, the same thing. And so sometimes when you get to the smaller places in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Missoula, Montana, like you said, they're probably chartering a plane, I guess, but it's like, that's a long flight. You're coming from middle of nowhere to middle of nowhere. It's just not quite your normal everyday type travel distance wise and location wise. So it's a little bit of an added probably benefit to the home team in this situation. Just like we talked about, like I said, some of the weirder locations in college football, it's the same thing for better or worse. And maybe there shouldn't be a reason, but it happens. We see it every year. Like I said, for instance, West Virginia and for college football, a team that just always plays a lot better at home than on the road. And you have to think that the wonky travel there, middle of nowhere, longer distances for teams has something to do with it. So it's the same effect here. All righty. Well, that's all we've got for you today. Cousin Jared, any parting words?
Nope.
All right, short and sweet. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Picks with the Professor. Don't forget to subscribe so you can enjoy all the sports betting content we've brought on this channel. It's dropped right to your feed. If you haven't seen it yet, college football, we've got covering every single conference championship game, including the extra action game on Friday afternoon and the Army-Navy game. Already a look ahead pick. We locked into that one. So lots of good stuff to check out. We're back again every day this week, except for Sunday with college basketball betting content. Until I see you again, as always, best of luck. And remember, you can eat your betting money, but please don't bet your eating money.